Gamecock fans, now you can have your coffee and also support the Gamecocks in a championship quest to get to the top of the SEC and the top of the country by going to GamecockCoffee.com and purchasing Rise and Shine New Orleans Roast Gourmet Coffee. All of your purchases go to benefit Garnet Trust and put NIL dollars in the coffer of the Gamecocks official NIL collective. Check it out today and support the Gamecocks NIL. Good morning, Gamecock fans. JC Shurburtt here with coffee. Today is Tuesday, March 25th, the year of our Lord 2025. And as always, very happy that you guys and gals have decided to listen today. That makes me happy. Had a lot of views, especially on the YouTube side of things yesterday. So certainly appreciate that. Everybody getting fired up about spring football, probably. Maybe wanting to hear what the take was from the weekend on the baseball diamond. Maybe a little men's basketball transfer portal news. Yeah, it just it never ends. Lots of news yesterday, by the way. First, we'll tell you that tonight the South Carolina Gamecocks on two sports that play on a diamond are playing two schools that you always want to beat. South Carolina plays Clemson at Beckham Field in softball as the Palmetto series continues. I think the first pitch is at 6 on SEC Network Plus, and then 7 o'clock later, the Gamecocks play the Tar Heels on the baseball diamond. Brandon Sweeney, who's been the closer, he gets the start for Carolina against the Heels. This game's kind of weird. Sometimes the better team doesn't always win. It's usually played a little later, I would think, if I'm contemplating this correctly. But a chance to get a W for the Gamecocks with number 1 Tennessee coming to town this weekend. The Gamecocks will be trying to really avoid a sweep there. But Sweeney's on the hill for the Cocks against the Tar Heels. Like I said, you want to beat those two schools in any sport, anytime, regardless of record, especially Clemson in softball. I think one of the things that kind of facilitated, I guess, a change in softball was Clemson just starts a program and all of a sudden they're better than Carolina right out the chute. And didn't sit too well with the softball community at South Carolina, but Ashley Chastain Woodard has that rivalry circled. In basketball, more transfer portal news. So Nick Pringle announces publicly he's hitting the portal, was told yesterday by a contact, probably needed to. So he's gone. Arden Conyers was gone previously. He officially got in the portal yesterday. Zach Davis is in the portal. Austin Hero is in the portal. And I think, is that it? I'm thinking that's it for now. Cam Scott is up in the air as to whether or not he'll return. I'm leaning towards no. No. But, both sides, if they want to come back, I think Cam would want to come back from what I'm told. But we'll see sort of what happens. Certainly, if you can get something out of him, that's good. But it looks like they're going to have a completely new roster next season. I can tell you that there's some guys out there already. It's very competitive, folks. And it's kind of the Wild West right now with some of these players. So it's best to keep names under the radar until they're ready to rock and roll. And that's just kind of how, I think it goes. I think some of that stuff, because football was sort of the same way, keep in mind, until this lawsuit gets settled on April 7th, which they're hopeful it will, we're going to see, it's going to be tough because you don't want to tip somebody else off. You have agents working 24 hours a day, angling, things like that. It's way different than college football recruiting used to be, as far as, you may sneak a high school guy in that's committed to another school or something, but that's keep that quiet. But the visit list were known and stuff like that. So we'll see how that goes. But I do think South Carolina will have a significantly different roster next year. Will different be better? Well, you hope so. You definitely hope so. Football recruiting, some not so good news. Rodney Dunham, the 5-star defensive end from Charlotte, who's visited South Carolina more than anywhere else, goes to Notre Dame. Looks like Notre Dame thinks they're getting him. Crystal balls are flowing in. Predictions are flowing in for the Fighting Irish. This is one where if I'm South Carolina and Sterling Lucas and the staff. I mean, as long as the kid keeps the lines of communication open, I'd try to get him in for a game. You just never know. Notre Dame obviously played for the national title. They do have a new defensive coordinator and Chris Ash, as Al Golden went to the NFL. They do have, kind of good defensive line. It's Notre Dame, right? And I think, again, and some of the posters on the Big Spur and some other fans, they are kind of starting to repeat this, with North Carolina the highest level guys. If they don't stay and go to North Carolina when something good's going on at North Carolina, I mean, really good, then they're usually right in this era. They're looking for big brands. Ohio State, Notre Dame. Notre Dame certainly is one of those. So we'll see what happens there. But certainly that was disappointing. It was a Tennessee South Carolina battle before that. So maybe the Vols are probably just as surprised as people in Columbia on that one. But we've talked about him several times. Spring practice rolls on, and I had a nice little message in the comments that I try not to read, but I was in a mood yesterday, so I decided to go through and put myself in an even worse mood. I don't listen unless it's football. Well, then you probably listen every day because I talk football every day. It's in the description on the video. We do talk other things, and basketball portal's open, and that's important, and it's a morning podcast. And so I feel like it's my duty in a lot of ways to say, hey, there's a game tonight, or here's what the score was last night. But it's a football deal. I'm a helmet head. That's what I love talking about. Recruiting. It's kind of my background. I I would say something like I can do this in my sleep, but when you say stuff like that and then you have a bad episode, which there have been some, in my opinion, according to my standards, then like people are like, well, he's just mailing it in and doing it in his sleep, right? So no, we have to prepare for that. So I listened to the press conferences yesterday. Mike Shula, Clayton White had some takeaways. I'm not going to sit here and regurgitate everything, but the first thing that stood out on offense was Rodney Newsome Jr., the transfer portal addition from Western Kentucky, is working at center with Boaz Stanley. Now, I've said for a while I felt like Bo would be the starting center, and that's based on feedback, intel, who he is as a player, his experience at center last year. Now, when they landed Newsome, he did play some center at Western Kentucky. Ryan Brubaker's out this spring. He was kind of the number 2 center. But Shula mentioned yesterday Newsome was working there as well. So this may be a cross-training thing where Newsome works some at guard, some at center. Maybe he's just a backup center. Who knows? Maybe he's the starting center. I don't, when you're talking Bo Stanley V versus a Brubaker, I look at both those players and I'm like, well, Stanley, even though he's new to the program, unless he just can't pick up the signals and things like that, which happens, then I would expect him to be the center over Ryan. And that's nothing against Ryan, but Ryan struggled with some injuries. He's out again, that kind of thing. But that would be my heavy favorite and my projection. Newsome, Stanley, different story. Newsome has a lot to it, and there are some. You talk to 20 different people, inside, outside the program, and tell them to analyze the 3 transfer portal offensive linemen, and you get 3 different answers as to who's great. Maybe they're all great, maybe they're all not so great. Who knows? But some say Nick Sharp from Wake Forest. I'm intrigued by him because he's huge and he doesn't look fat. And like I've said before, he played 700 snaps at that size at Wake last year. And, maybe I'm looking at a clip of him blocking Peter Woods from Clemson. He did a pretty good job. And I'm like, oh yeah, so maybe that's a little bit of Gamecock glasses, garnet color glasses there with Nick. And then Newsome, big athletic kid out of the Memphis area. Started at a junior. I think he started at Memphis, then went to a junior college in Mississippi, and then Western Kentucky, and then Carolina. And he can fall under this new JUCO rule. There's a Rutgers commit, of all things, from the portal that's filed a lawsuit in New Jersey to try to Diego Pavia it and get another year. I think eventually they may just say, all right, junior college doesn't count anymore towards the eligibility clock. This seems like one of those things the NCAA will just throw up its hands and say no. I'll say this, though. It is a slippery slope. It is a slippery slope. If you start messing with the eligibility clock, you're going to have guys literally that could legally go and say if they, let's say they don't make any NIL money their first couple of years, because that's the gist of it. You're robbing me of NIL money because junior colleges don't have any. And so you start doing that, you have guys that, like, remember Darius Rush, NFL guy, right? Well, he didn't really come into his own until his last 2 years, and really came into his own his final year. Didn't play a whole lot, maybe some special teams here and there before. So what do you do with a guy like him? Well, he didn't play. He only made 50 grand in NIL money. He was a role player. Then boom. Well, I want those other 2 years back so I can make money. So I don't know. You know, I'm there's a lot of things with all this stuff with NIL lawsuits, eligibility that will work for certain, like Rasul Faison, obviously. You need him the league for the Gamecocks. You need him to get that deal from the NCAA. And I think now that there's another lawsuit, it's probably a given. But that are probably good for the Gamecock short term, probably not good for the sport long term, or makes the sport very different. But so Newsom has probably more years of eligibility than we think at this point. But I thought that was pretty interesting. I thought, and I knew when they signed Newsom that he had played some center. I didn't know that he was going to work at center here, and he's probably cross training. I would imagine. And Shula talked about Big Tree, and Big Tree is working at both spots. And Shula kind of confirmed what we knew. Big Tree is very talented. So there's that. That was a good takeaway, I think, from that press conference. And then Clayton White, talked about just kind of putting it all back together. And that's kind of the gist of what I want to talk about this morning, the main theme, if you will. I think one thing he said that was kind of funny was you had a freak back there in Nick Emanware, and obviously you could say, hey, go cover this guy, that guy. He mentioned go cover Florida's best receiver, and it brought back a bad memory because remember that Florida game that Carolina shockingly lost. I'm convinced that game in 2023 was payback for the Will Muschamp game that got him fired, where Florida was beating that 2014 Carolina team all day. And Carolina somehow, Florida missed field goals, got a punt blocked. Got a punt blocked and a field goal blocked. Gamecocks somehow go tie it. I think Mike Davis on a lateral, he fumbled, then picked it up, ran in the end zone, tied the game, and then it went to overtime. Gators scored 2017, and then Dylan Thompson ran the option. Just nobody took him into the end zone, and Carolina won. I'm convinced 2023 was payback for that. Just like on the flip side, maybe that 2021 game where Carolina beat the snot out of Dan Mullen's team, surprisingly, and he got fired. Maybe that was revenge for 18 when Carolina's down there. Had the game well in hand at the Swamp. Could have changed the trajectory of the Muschamp era. And they couldn't stop the run, and somehow Florida ran the ball all day and came back. Crazy game. And then the next year, the bad call in the rain. That, too, would have been 2 top 10 wins in a row. That didn't happen. So yeah, the Gators and Gamecocks series, sometimes things, they come back to bite you at times, right? So that's just that. But yeah, Nick was covering Ricky Pearsall for those that don't remember on the game-winning touchdown. But Nick certainly improved quite a bit in the coverage aspect. They all did. Kilgore, Nick, DQ Smith, the corners, they covered much better last year than I think in previous years. Part of that was because you got a pass rush, just to be honest. I mean, you think about Eamon Waray's two picks and the pick six against Oklahoma. That poor guy was under duress. uh, just chucked it down the field. And he basically said, you can't replace a guy like Nick. He said, back to regular football. And I think what Clayton White means by that is, don't be alarmed by it, by the way, is, Eamon Warray, if you listen to one of his interviews about the pick six that was called back against LSU, a play that certainly will live in infamy if the Gamecocks are never in position again to get to the playoff, which I think they will be, but you never know. That play will live in infamy. But when you listen to the interview that he did, I believe with 1801 Media, he starts, or no, it was Tailgate Talks. It was one of the two. Anyways, he did an interview. If the Tailgate Talks guys are listening and it was that one, I apologize. But he was talking about how he had the freedom to kind of switch, and this is good coaching and a good scheme of things when you have a guy that can do that. In other words, you got a coverage assignment and you switch it mid-play. You read the play and you switch, and that's why Garrett Nussmeier threw it right to him. He didn't know he's going to be there, right? And it kind of fools the scouting report, so to speak. And you can do that when you have players that are very experienced and have the talent to do that. So maybe that means they probably won't do as much. I don't know. He mentioned Zabari Sandy coming back, player we've forgotten about probably because he was injured and he was an early commit, but he's out of D.C. He's a bigger guy. He mentioned Jaquel Hallman, our true freshman, is working back there. So we'll see who gets that starting spot opposite DQ Smith at safety, because it looks like Jelon Kilgore is going to stay at nickel. Or maybe, wait a minute. I'm backing up. I'm wrong. Don't forget that I said Jaquel and Zabari. I think those were the nickels. He was talking about the nickels because he also talked about Brandon Cisse from NC State jumping over and learning that spot a little bit. So the other safeties, I would say David Busey, Kendall Daniels, a true freshman, is a player back there. Of course, Peyton Williams was the backup last season that played when he was behind DQ. But you can't replace Nick Eamon. I do think maybe they won't have a Nick back there. I think they will down the road, especially if they get Tamarian Watkins from Rock Hill in this class with Jazavian Currents. I mean, that guy's kind of, I would say, similar back there. I think Kendall Daniels is similar. Will they be as good as Nick? I don't know. Nick was a special football player. Nick not only was a big freak, was at Carolina, a big tall guy at 229 pounds that could run like the wind and cover and all that. He was really a guy that would put his nose in the dirt in the run game and stop players. I think in the second half of the bowl, the Gamecocks missed that, his physicality. Safeties are an eraser. That's why they call them safety. Oh, it's the safety, just in case, you know what I'm saying? So can't replace him. So I thought that kind of stood out about what he said. And I've been having some discussions about the defensive line, and I want to throw this out at you. I think it would be foolish here on March 25th for me to sit here and say this defense could be better. That's bold, man. And I do make some bold predictions. I'm not afraid to be wrong. I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. But that's just not something I'm willing to do because there's still a lot of moving parts. I do see a path, though, where South Carolina, and you talk about being as good. Well, there were all these NFL guys. There was a big play defense, very steady unit. Wasn't perfect. It wasn't as dominant maybe as, some of the better defenses through the history of Carolina football, especially statistically. But we're in a different era of football, especially in the SEC where, when Lou Holtz and Charlie Strong were dialing it up, teams threw it, certainly. Steve Spurrier especially was throwing it at Florida. It wasn't like pre-Spurrier. But still, teams gotten, the Georgia ran Mark Richt's offense, which is pro style basically. You had Tennessee with David Cutcliffe, a very good system, very great play caller. But they would, yeah, base it out of the eye, and it was kind of a pro style deal. You did have some spreads and things here and there. Even Bobby Petrino, who gave the Spurrier era defensive coordinators fits, was basically a pro style guy, still is. So there wasn't, teams won with defense in the SEC for the most part. They'd run the ball, stop the run. I mean, Nick Saban didn't even evolve that part of it till 2013. But now, I mean, you went from the SEC always having the best defensive talent and some real studs on offense too, to the SEC having both. And that's why you have some SEC games that are 63-31, and you have some that are 27-6, 17-6. It just depends on whose day it is, but just about everybody's capable of putting on points. So it is a different era. I'm not making excuses. The numbers are the numbers, right? But Carolina, did have a pretty awesome defense last year, and everybody talks about it. Gosh, somebody used the word generational. Come on, man. Please, somebody please learn the definition of a generation. But it's probably it is a generational amount of talent leaving, and I think the NFL draft should prove that out. I keep seeing Todd McShay's player rankings, and I look for Gamecock players, and a tight end. It was tight end and running back, so it wasn't defense. But I'm like, where's Rocket Sanders and Josh Simon? I mean, who in the NFL does not want to draft those guys? I mean, Rocket Sanders especially. I've seen some running backs listed ahead of him that I wouldn't even draft. I mean, so I don't know. Maybe they want to check his shoulder. I don't know what the deal is. Nevertheless, I don't want to get off on that sidetrack. But so I would be crazy if I sat here and said the defense is going to be better. I think the defense has a chance to stand on its own, not compare it to last year, and be pretty good if some things happen. And I'll tell you why. You can't replace like the experience of a Debo Williams or all those guys up front. The leadership of Demetrius Knight. I mentioned Nicky Manwari, but it's not like I've said this before. It's not like it's void of experienced players. Jelon Kilgore is back. DQ Smith is back. Dylan Stewart, big deal there, is back. You have guys like Monkel Goodwine and Nick Barrett inside that are back. Guys on the defensive end, Brian Thomas Jr., Gear, Desmond Umazulu is back. I mean, you have some guys there that have played. Jerron Willis, Fred Johnson, who's a freak, who Clayton White mentioned yesterday as being, a guy that has showed up early to try and learn, and that's always a good sign. Peyton Williams, who I mentioned. I mean, there are players coming back, but then, they're young and experienced, but then you talk about talent. Well, last year's, like I said, historic talent level on defense, and that was a deep team and all that. But you're not necessarily replacing guys that were very talented with guys that aren't. And we went through that when we talked about the 2014 comparisons. And I'll take so here's my point. I think that there are a lot of what ifs, but what if this? What if you actually upgrade the linebackers? And that's nothing against Demetrius Knight, Bam Martin Scott, Debo Williams, but you are talking about if it ends up being, say, Fred Johnson and Justin Okoronkwo, two guys that one's 6'3", 245, and it can run 1'6'3", 220, and can run great length on both of those guys. They're like if, they have the size of a guy like Brad Johnson, which Clayton White likes, those bigger they're not defensive, they're linebackers, but bigger guys that can rush the passer. But then you're also throwing speed and athleticism in there. You've got Dylan Stewart at end. What if Jaylen Brown ends up taking that other spot? And There's a lot of good feedback on him in yesterday's episode. So what do you lose there? On the interior, I keep hearing so much good stuff about Gabriel Brownlow Dindy. I actually went back and read his scouting report from ESPN.com. Tom Luganville and those guys are friends of mine. They know what they're looking at. And I guess it got lost on me in 2022. He was ranked third in the country overall. They had him ahead of a lot of guys. Probably not Walter Nolan, but just about everybody. Shamar Stewart was not as high, that kind of thing. And the feedback's been good. So look, let's say Brownlow Dindy nails down that one tackle spot. So there's your TJ Sanders replacement, basically. And then, Xavion Hardy, Clayton White backed up what I've been saying. Needed to change his body. He had some good things to say. He's big, all that. Maybe he's not quite the starter. So as of now, it's Goodwine. Well, Goodwine was good last year in a backup role. Can he take that next step? Obviously, he was a top 100 recruit as well. I think he showed why at times last year. At other times, looked like a guy that was kind of just trying to get better. So there's that. And Goodwine gets the job. Hardy gets the job. Dare I say, Devontae Miles or Nick Barrett gets the job. That's those guys. You'd probably be just hopeful that they took a next step, right? And it's not that far of a next step. If you with certain guys have further to step than others. So you're talking about a defensive front. If things go, I don't want to say according to plan, but if things turn out a certain way, and there's injuries and guys, just because a guy's looking good now doesn't mean he's going to continue to look good. With Brownlow Dindy, right now, it's like, well, what you're kind of scratching your head about A&M and why he didn't play. Well, what if there's some reason that nobody knows and you get in the heat of the moment, you find that out. And this happens all the time in college football, but I'm pondering the what ifs. To quote Pulp Fiction, just pondering the what ifs right here. And so then you're going Jaylen Brown, 265 and can run at one end. And then Goodwine, top 100 guy out of high school. Hopefully he's better. Not that I have to get too much better. Again, I think he's ready to go start. Gabriel Brownlow Dindy, obviously a top 10 prospect, coming into his own. And then Dylan Stewart. And then your two linebackers are Justin Okoronkwo, who's a fast German, and Alabama, who's a Nick Saban recruit. And if it's Sean Murphy, he fits in the Nick Saban recruit mold as well. And Sean Murphy's a good player. So it could be him. Probably not straight line speed wise what Okoronkwo is or Fred Johnson, but a fast enough guy and a talented guy, good tackler. And then Fred Johnson, at linebacker. That is a big and fast front seven. That may be on paper, and you don't win games on paper. We know that. One of the best as far as just what these guys are, height, weight, speed, even recruiting rankings. Because if you go Brown, Goodwine, Brownlow Dindy, and Dillon, that's 2 5-stars on one side, 2 4-stars on another. All, I believe, Jaylen Brown was a top 125 guy, top 150, but all the other ones top 100 prospects. That's a pretty good, pretty stellar group of starters on paper. You need depth, and there will be depth. But just talking starters in the front seven, considering you have to replace everybody in your front seven except Dylan Stewart, I think that this is how you'd want to replace them. Because if I'm going to replace great players, I'm going to replace them with size, speed, ability. They have to be good enough players. All those data points are prospect data points. They have to be good enough football players. But you can get that out of them. Luke Day and the nutrition staff and the strength staff, Clayton White gave a shout out to him. So that nutrition staff puts in food. Yuri and their nutrition director, he puts in the food, and then Luke Day adds the muscle. That's what Clayton said yesterday. So that's good. And then there's other possibilities, other people I mentioned that could provide depth. And then on the back end, losing Nick stinks as far as like you can't replace him. But there's a reason they brought in Cisse, Miles Norwood. You got a guy like Jalewis Solomon back there. If Akari Swain hopefully will be back, those are all corners. But Jalen Kilgore, like Clayton White mentioned yesterday, 5 interceptions. That's probably close to tops in the conference. And he had some that were kind of in game situations on errant throws. But like the Alabama pick, we remember that one, folks. Set up the field goal to end the half. That was a bad mistake by Milroe, but he stepped in and picked that one off. Really, he's a really good player, Jalen Kilgore. So we'll see what happens with that. But and then let me just throw this other thing at you before I get off and go talk on 107.5 The Game with Wild Bill Gunner. Uh, Carolina's going to target a defensive tackle in the portal this next window. They feel like there'll be one or two available that they really want. They're going to go all in and get them to try to get them. And if they do, this is speculation that they will. What if this guy's a war daddy, like 6'5", 320, 315, 6'3", a big dude, proven player, right? Guy like DeAndre Jules, or probably maybe a little more productive. And what if that guy beats out everybody else? And so you got a war daddy beside Brownlow Dindy. And war daddies are guys like Walter. That's bad. Let me back up. Because I love Walter Nolan. I think he's one of the best defensive tackles ever. Besides Jalen Carter. Walter Nolan kind of took the crown from him. But those types of high level guys, TJ Sanders and up. Let's go that. TJ Sanders really good. So you got two guys in there like that, and Jaylen Brown, who's 265 and can run, and then Dylan Stewart on the other side. That makes the front seven almost on paper nasty, like what I would call nasty. So maybe there's a reason Darren Usher, the director of player personnel, not on any shows he's been on with us, but other shows, has said, I'll predict that we'll have more sacks next season. Okay, dude, I'll take that, wouldn't you? And to finalize all this, I've said this before, as I ponder the what ifs. So what if this, what if that? What if this defensive front is really good? What if the defense does not take as big a step back as we think? I've said this before. Great programs don't flinch when they lose double-digit guys to the NFL. They don't. Georgia's now Kirby Smart, judging by his press conferences right now, he's probably not too happy. But I feel like Kirby, and he went through it. This is the first time in a long time. They have a lot of inexperience in youth. They still have talent. So I think he's coaching hard. I don't think there's any problems at Georgia. Although with their, they play the same schedule they did last year. It's just flipped. A lot of these teams come to Athens next year. It wouldn't surprise me to see Georgia take a couple of losses again next year. There's nobody that's like Georgia and Bama were for the longest of times. There's too much attrition in college football to realistically think that. Everybody in the SEC is pretty good, top to bottom, really. You think about Georgia won the SEC, and they beat Mississippi State pretty handily. And, I don't think they weren't trying to blow them out or anything, but it ended up being a 10-point game, 41-31, I think, in Athens. So that's how tough this league is. So I don't think Kirby is planning on struggling, but I do think they could lose some games. I think a lot of it's coach speak, but when you hear him talk like that about inexperience, he's hoping to get his inexperienced players up to snuff and right, and to maintain the standard of that program. But they're not flinching. Georgia's expectations are just like Georgia's, and they put 14, I think, to the combine. Texas put 14 in the combine. I think Ohio State was up there, and then it's South Carolina and Ole Miss at 11. Ole Miss still has expectations. So if you're going to go from Good program, better than they were before 2000. Still not what you would call, contenders in the SEC every year. Probably waiting on the other shoe to drop in Florida and Auburn and Oklahoma and all those blue bloods in the league to ascend again and pushes the Gamecocks down. That's kind of a BS theory, I think. Because I think if you're good, you're good. Even during the Spurrier years where everybody's like, well, they were all down at the same time and blah, blah, blah. Well, in 2012, Tennessee was down, but Tennessee was down for, how, shoot, 13 years. Why did that change anything? In 2012, Florida and Georgia both went 11-1. So did South Carolina went 10-2. They had basically would have probably had three teams in the playoff from that same division. So it wasn't always that way. It was some years. The year Carolina won the East in 2010, the East was, I would say, down. But so that's probably what people think. Well, this team was down, and these other teams got all these star-rated guys from the portal, and they're going to be back up, and Auburn's going to be. All these teams are going to be back up. South Carolina will just go down, and that's logical because that's what normally happens. But to take that next step as a program, you need to be able to go through a year like last year, which was good. I think Shane Beamer believes that they left a lot on the table, and I think they did. And where you lose good players and you replace them with good players. I think Steve Spurrier did that during the big years 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. That's a long time, and there were good players getting drafted and leaving the program at the time. And then by the time things started to dip, that was an erosion of recruiting. And had a lot to do with Spurrier's age, had a lot to do with Spurrier's staff that he brought in at the time, and then a lot of guys that were pretty touted recruits that just didn't work out for whatever reason. Lots of misses that can get you too. There's no signs Beamer's doing that. If anything, the recruiting is getting better, but that's on paper. Anyway, wanted to ponder the what ifs with you right there. Don't forget, need NIL funds for basketball. So check out GamecockCoffee.com. Also, golfing, not equipment. I keep saying equipment. Golfing gear. Our good friends, Palmetto Golf and Belts, Brandon. Go to PalmettoGolfing.com. You can get one of those handcrafted Palmetto Crescent Garnet and Black belts. $99 are normally $150 at most retail, high-end retail stores. Also, a couple of customers bought from him and said, boy, it ships out really quick. Two days and it's there. It's better than waiting a month on things, right? Like you got to do to get a doctor's appointment nowadays. Where I live, it's frustrating. Anyway, be sure to catch Inside the Gamecocks, the morning show. John Strickland's in, so if you want more football talk, he's going to be really good at dropping knowledge. Always one of my favorite segments of the week. Phil and I will be along for Inside the Gamecocks, the show, where we'll go over a lot of different various topics and, of course, converse with the folks from the Nana Sports chat box. All right, JC Shurburtt signing off. This has been Coffee. Have a terrific Tuesday. Remember, it's the worst day of the week, except for tacos. Holla at you soon.